what is the current picture of family life in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, well, I think probably the most instructive to get a feel for what's happened over the last few generations. So I was born in the 1970s. If you were a teenager in the mid 1970s, 9 out of 10 16-year-olds sitting their O-levels in the mid-70s would have lived with both their parents. So it was quite rare not to live with both your parents age 16, just 50 years ago. Today, it's about 50-50. So in the space of not very long, really, a generation, 2 generations, we have gone from it being pretty unusual to not live with both your parents to absolutely normal. And that 50-50 is a national average as well. You go into poorer communities and often, I think the bottom 20%, so the bottom quintile of income, it's less than 1 in 5 now live with married parents. So when you go into certain pockets of deprivation, you see almost complete fatherhood deserts, really, in some of our estates around the UK. So it's a pretty bleak picture in some areas, and it's happened incredibly quickly. And I don't think people realise quite how quickly and severely it's happened. I think often the sort of the thinking class, the chattering classes, are slightly protected from this because it falls very unequally as well. So marriage rates in the top quintile are about 85%. About 85% of children live with married parents, and I think it's about another 9% with cohabiting parents. So you're almost certainly going to have a fairly stable home. But it's as you get lower down into deeper deprivation, you see that family structure disintegrates almost completely in some areas. And because we aren't always seeing that firsthand, we forget how serious it can be, I think.
You mentioned a few things worth pulling upon those threads in that response. One, fatherless deserts, and then secondly, family breakdown and the disintegration of it happening so quickly. Let's take those in turn, because I suppose they're probably very interlinked. Why is it, or have you found why it is that there are fatherless deserts? What's driving the lack of fathers in these areas, and what do you think it is culturally that has led to such a rapid breakdown in family life?
Yeah, so they are very closely interlinked, and I think sometimes we're more comfortable talking about fathers than we are about family breakdown, and particularly about marriage. But at the core of what's gone on is this decline of family formation. So actually, when we talk about family breakdown, formal divorce has been coming down for about 20 years now in the UK. The issue is that families aren't forming in the first place. People aren't getting together, they're not getting married, they're not entering civil partnerships, they don't have that stability. And that matters because actually the act of commitment quadruples your chances of being committed. So the average cohabitation lasts about 3 years, the average marriage lasts 12 years. So it does matter that you make this formal commitment if you want stability for you and your child. And that's not happening. So in 2022, I think that was the first year ever where the majority of adults in the UK were not married or in a civil partnership. And the majority of children were not born into a marriage or civil partnership. So that's quite a tipping point we experienced. And as to the question of why, I mean, it's complex. There's no one thing, but there are a few things I point towards. You've got the overarching culture, which comes really after the Second World War of individualism. So you have this huge communal effort. People forget that we had rationing for 10 years after the Second World War. We had this very communitarian feel, very communal effort, and that pendulum swung towards individualism. And within that, there are probably a couple of key things I would flag that happened for really good reasons, I think. So one of them would be female employment was a good thing, is a good thing. And what you saw was in the Second World War, a lot of women went out to work by necessity. I think there's a slight false thing that women didn't work and now they do. Actually, a lot of working class women did work. Employment was sort of 50%-ish, I think. But it moved really, really a lot higher, sort of moved from 50 to 70%. And a lot of the women found they enjoyed work and they liked having the economic freedom to live the life the way they wanted to. And so what you saw after the Second World War was a series of laws passed, which essentially made sure that women got the same pay, the same rights, and everything else. I think everyone would agree this is a good thing. But then with that economic freedom comes the lower necessity that you don't need to depend on someone else's income. And so that was probably one step. The other one that's talked about quite a lot is the introduction of the contraceptive pill, and how actually you were able to decouple sex from relationships in a way. And it's a really interesting one. I have to say, one of the most interesting things about it is the technology existed for the pill quite some time before the pill was actually launched as a potential contraceptive. So there is a sort of confluence of culture as well as the actual ability to have a drug that does this. So it's not entirely straightforward that one equaled the other. There is that culture that came with it. So there's a couple I'd flag, but possibly while talking about culture, one of the really big things that's happened, I think, probably in the last 25 years, is that the way we view marriage has shifted now as not something that you do to build your life around, but the thing you do after you've built your life. So you hear it referred to as this, it's now a capstone rather than a cornerstone. So if you look at the age people get married, going back only a generation or so, it probably would have been early 20s. And you'd have started out on life by getting married, and then you'd have bought your home, and you'd have grown your family, and your career would have grown, and you'd have negotiated that in partnership. Now, what you hear from young people is actually, I want to be able to build my career, buy my home, get myself settled, and then I will think about getting married and having a family. What that has actually done is it's delayed marriage a long time. It's delayed fertility as well. So you're seeing very low fertility rates. People tend not to have children or many children until they are in a stable relationship. So you've seen all these knock-on effects of that. And then you're into a cycle of, well, we're not married because we don't value marriage, because we don't get married because we don't value marriage. And I think that's what we're seeing now with a number of consequences.